So today I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that I did with my colleague Doug Roscoe. We got a curriculum redesign and innovation grant from the College of Arts and Sciences Dean's Office to adopt an OER text for our Introduction to American Politics class, a 101 class. So what I want to start off sort of really briefly is talking a little bit about what OER resources are, some of the challenges that we ran into, a little bit about why we did this project. I think I have an outline here. And then talk a little bit about what we've done, what we've learned, and where we're going from there. So to start off with the first one, just so we're sort of all on the same page, maybe we all know something about this, maybe we don't. Just a couple of different definitions from the OER Commons, from the Hewlett Foundation about what OER resources are. Right? They have an intellectual property license that permits their free use and repurposing by others. Right? So you can kind of do what you want with them. You'll find stuff from full courses, right? I mean, MOOCs, MIT is doing a lot of putting courses online. Course materials, modules, textbooks, videos, tests, software, all of this stuff can be considered OER resources, quizzes, labs, activities, that sort of stuff. And feel free to interrupt me at any point in time when I'm talking. If you go out there, you'll find all sorts of OER repositories. Wikipedia actually has its own OER repository, Wiki Educator. This is not comprehensive, right? This is just some examples of what's out there. The OER Commons is out there, right? And you can go through and you can search it. This is one I did for Political Science, 221 different resources available for our political science search. Merlot, I don't know how you say that, right? You can say however you want, depending if you're a wine drinker. Multimedia educational resources for learning and online teaching, right? Again, this is just looking at the social sciences because this is where I'm coming from. You'll see there's all sorts of different stuff here, right, available. The learning registry, right, another one, so on and so forth. We can go on and on. There's repositories everywhere for OER materials. And as we started to think about this project, we got the grant. This is kind of how we felt, right? That there's all this stuff out here, and it's like a mountain of stuff, right? In a format that's not, I don't know, for me, it wasn't entirely usable in the way that I teach, right? I don't know about you guys, maybe you're way more prepared than me, but usually I'll say, okay, I'm teaching Congress today. I'm going to search for Congress and see like a video or a quiz or an activity. What can I find? I don't go out at the beginning of the semester. It's sort of, reworking every class, a little bit tweaking as I go on. And when you do this, the way that the materials are available, I don't think necessarily lend themselves very much to that. You might find a whole course, and you've got to go through the whole course, or these whole courses, or one little thing, or you go into a repository, there's 220 things, none of which are related to the course that you're teaching that day. So you've spent all this time going through it. So we really started to feel sort of overwhelmed with all this stuff that's out there. So we started to narrow our focus down, well, maybe we can find a textbook. And we did, right? And this is I think, what we really focused on. And I'll talk a little bit why about after I talk about the two texts that we found. We found this one under an attribution, non-commercial, no derivative works. All right, so we can use this, what that's saying, for non-commercial purposes, but the key restriction on this was no derivative works for us, which means there's some restrictions on what you can do with it on your own. The other text that we found was this, and I'm going to show it to you like this because this was a really weird text. This was developed by, and the name of the publisher is escaping me now. They used to do free textbooks, and now they moved away from the free model. Someone will remember it at some point. These authors developed this text under the Saylor Foundation grant. And then they realized after they did it in 2011 that they were not going to get any more grants to update the text. So the second updated version of the text is not under Creative Commons license. It's under this publishing house's license. That having been said, once you put something out under a Creative Commons license, you can't take it back, right? It's stuck. It's out there. So for this, right, we could, using this as a share alike license, which meant that we can sort of slice and dice it and use it how we see fit, so long as what we do we share with everyone else. So ultimately we decided to go with this text that is sort of authorless. It's really bizarre, and I'll come back around to why that is in a little bit. So why do we focus on using a textbook? Well, previous research shows that, right, there are benefits to OER texts when you compare these to other texts. Students like them. They prefer those classes to enroll in classes with OER texts. They see OER texts as having a similar quality. They come to class better prepared. There's all sorts of research in different fields that suggests this. But research also suggests that students frequently do not purchase the textbooks for their classes. The cost of textbooks is a real issue for students. We did some research in our class, which basically confirms what research in other institutions show. So I'm just going to sort of show you what we asked our students in our classes. Whether in your academic career, the cost of the textbooks to do a bunch of these things, right? So the first one is fail a course. The second one is earn a poor grade, not purchase the required text, withdraw, drop, not register, take fewer courses. Now, the big bar you'll see here is never. Right? Good news is for most of our students, right, this isn't necessarily an issue. But for some of these, they are. In particular, what I'm looking for, not in order. Not purchase the required text right here. You'll see the never on that is the smallest. Only about 38% of our students have said, nope, I've never not purchased the text. Right? That means over 60% of the students said they either seldom, occasionally, or frequently did not purchase textbooks for their classes. For the not purchasing the text, the frequency is 11.5%. So 1 out of 10 students say they frequently don't purchase text for their class. About 30%, 27.9, said I occasionally don't purchase the text for my class. So for about 40% of our students, they're fairly regularly not buying textbooks for their class. Obviously, this is a problem, right? Now, the numbers are not as big, but you still see some issues. 18% said they occasionally or frequently take fewer classes. About 10% said they drop a class because of the cost of the text. Only about 6.5% said they withdraw. About 15% said they earn a poor grade because they couldn't afford the cost of a textbook. And about 7% said they failed a course because they couldn't buy the textbook. So this is confirmed sort of what national data shows and other research, that for students, the cost of the textbook is an issue, right? And if you want your students to do well in your class, then you have to sort of think about that. So for us, the solution was to try to use these free textbooks, right, in order to reduce the cost, make the text available to students on day one, because I'm sure we've all experienced a student who comes and says to us, oh, my loans aren't in yet, so I can't buy the textbook. I ordered it from some shady textbook purchasing company because it was the lowest price, and they sent it the slow boat to the United States, right, and so it's not here yet, and so they fall behind. And so we were hoping that, right, having that free text available to students would help them. Now, part of the problem is, right, when you think about publishers' textbooks, they're fancy, right? They have bells and whistles and quizzes and study guides and maybe PowerPoints and activities and stuff, right, that goes with it. OER textbooks are less likely to have that sort of stuff. And as we know, right, students tend to like that stuff. They tend to be engaged by it. So the way we started out with this project is through our grant from the Dean's Office. We got some money to hire student workers to find things that students like for us. And so we started out with this by developing a wiki, which I'd like to show you. It's a total mess. I'll be the first to acknowledge it. But what we did is we just started making this as a repository. And we had our student workers go out, you'll see their names are on there, and find stuff, right, that might be useful to use, right? So here's an interactive constitution, some games about the branches of government, checks and balances, right? The citizenship test, right? They identified all sorts of resources for us. The Bill of Rights, going on and on, a constitutional convention, amendments. And we have these, right, there's a lot of them. federalism, right? If you go down, this is a really big, messy wiki at this point in time. But the idea is we just started getting things together for us to be able to sort of slice and dice to put together a project, right? Or to put together a course site for our students. Now, ideally, right, we might like to have these available in, integrated into the text. We're not quite there yet in this part of our project. But here's what we did to start off with and sort of our first offering of this. Because it's, right, an OER text, you can slice and dice it however you want. So the full text is available as part of the course site, but in every chapter, right, the chapter is right in the course site, right? So there's no, I don't have the book yet, I didn't have the chance to read it, I don't know where, I lost my textbook. Then Doug and I went through and we sort of culled all of these different resources and made them just available right now. Some of these we used in class, we had students pull them up. Some of them we'd asked them to do it outside of class, bring in their results. Some of them we do, sort of as we went along. But there's videos, there's activities, right, designed to help students. We also built our own quizzes, right? So for every chapter, you'd read the chapter, and then before the class where we started talking about that chapter, you do the quiz to make sure you're reading the text. And it was funny because one of the concerns is sort of academic dishonesty and can students not read the text. And one of my colleagues overheard one of my students say, yeah, Professor Jenkins, the text is electronic. So you can just search for the word in the quizzes. And then you just have to look through the 40 things that come up to find the answer. And he had to laugh because they were reading the text, maybe not in the traditional way, but they were going through, they thought they were gaming the system by doing this search. But in doing the search, they went through and they read, right, all 40 instances of this key concept. So can they cheat? Yes. And, they like to think that they're cheating. But if you take some time to develop the questions so that they're not really Googleable, if that's a word, right? But rather they have to go into the text. And that's what we've done. We found that they're actually, getting into the text, reading the text in order to complete the quizzes. They come to class prepared. They do some of these. We watch some of these. We engage in these activities. So we've built this sort of website based on this text. And you'll see in some cases, right, we decided chapters 6 and 7. We didn't need to have 6 and 7 be two separate chapters because it's a share-alike license. We're able to cut out the parts we didn't want, collapse them into one chapter, and create, we called it 6 and 7 so as not to confuse them so much. But we're able to do that sort of slicing and dicing. So for each chapter, for every chapter, right, all of this is available, right? The chapters within there's a quiz, and then there are activities that they can do, right? Balancing a working poverty budget, fixing Social Security, a video about food insecurity, the Affordable Care Act, et cetera, et cetera. So we've located all of these interactive features that we hope will, right, that students will like. And in fact, we asked our students about this, right, at the end of the semester. Right? We did some assessment as part of our grant to see, well, were students doing the things that we thought they were doing? So we asked them just some simple questions, right? As compared to your other texts this semester, how often did you use the text? These are mostly freshmen, right, first semester, so we couldn't say last year, whatever we had to say. And you'll see very few students, about 10% said I used it less. Most of them, about 50%, said I used it the same. 40% said I used it more frequently than my other texts in my other class. So they're using the textbook, right? They're engaged in that. We asked them about the quality, right? Because that's one of the concerns, right? Well, publishers are paying people, so they're going to produce better stuff. What do students think about the text? Less than 20% said it was worse. Over 60% said, yeah, not really different. And about 20% said it was actually better than the text they used for their other classes. One of the things, there's some research that's emerging that suggests that people like to read hard text as opposed to electronic text, so we asked about that. And our students were really kind of neutral about that, right? Only 20% said they prefer a hard copy of the text. More people said disagreed with that statement. So we're not really finding a strong preference for a hard text, and certainly the whole text is available as a PDF if they wanted to print it out, which I told them in class they could. I don't think many of them did, but they could if they wanted to. We then asked them about their preferred textbook option. This one's a little hard because when you put the word free in anything, people are going to probably pick that option. I don't necessarily know how you get around that, but students really, they would prefer, right, the free rather than having sort of all the bells and whistles, right, with all the other stuff that goes with it. And then the last thing we asked, right, was we wanted to sort of get at, well, how does this affect their likelihood of registering for class? Like, would they seek this out? Would they be more or less likely to register? And close to 80%, 75% of our students said they'd be more likely to register for a class that had these sorts of materials available. So generally speaking, I think in terms of looking at what the students thought about and how they engaged with the text, they were pretty positive. They're more likely, or they used it, right? They were engaged with it. They didn't see it as inferior quality. So these are all good, right, from the student outcome side. The issue that we're running into is sort of the moving forward, right? So we've invested all this time and work. I mean, first of all, it is time and work. We know this anytime that we change textbooks, right? There's work involved in that because you have to change your materials. You have to change some of the approaches that you're using. Because our quizzes are designed to make them read the text, we had to change all of our quizzes. That was a lot of work. But I put this quote up here because I think this is sort of not true in our field and even I think across fields, right? In a 2013 study, they said paying for expensive textbooks seems particularly questionable in introductory courses in which the information being presented is largely stable and the knowledge is readily available. That may be true in some disciplines. I'm not really sure that it is in some disciplines, but I know that it's certainly not true in political science. And I was sort of joking about this beforehand, right? When you talk to a bunch of 18-year-olds about the 2008 presidential election in 2014, right, that's ancient history to them, right? They don't remember that. They were 12 years old, right? And so one of the things that we're running into already is that our textbook is from 2011, and we need to update that. And there's no incentives to do that. And going back to talking about the text, the people who first delivered that realized, well, I got a grant to develop the text, and now what? And they've moved future editions out of the Creative Commons and under a publisher's license. So I've given this presentation a couple of times. I did it at our big main sort of disciplinary conference, and then I did it at a regional conference. And at that conference, I met someone from Georgia State who's interested in the same thing. So what we're trying to do is to pursue a little bit of a different model. Some other people are doing this. We've talked to some people at Creative Commons. And this is, I think, starting to emerge as a new model for this, is we're trying to do sort of a distributed modular approach to maintaining the textbook. For any one author, right, it's hard to maintain a whole textbook on top of what you're doing and all of the time constraints that you have and so on and so forth. But it's not hard to update one chapter, right? And we all have research expertise in specific areas in our introductory courses, right? We're teaching the scope of what's going on in our discipline, but we may be good at topic A. We know colleagues are good at topic B and topic C. So we're working with our colleague in Georgia State to develop a distributed model of textbook maintenance where each person would get a chapter. And the idea is that going back to our little wiki here is we'd have something much prettier than this, right? But it would be, the Introduction to American Politics or American Politics teaching source. Things would be organized by chapter and subject, right? With your textbook chapter and activities, videos, all that sort of thing. And each person, we'd have different people responsible for the maintenance of each chapter. It would allow people to go in and make sure that the links are still working, update the textbook chapter, so you have a chapter that's updated every year, right? Updating one chapter, most of the material isn't going to change, you're just going to add a few things to it. And then the other great thing is, right, going back to, how we all go before a class, oh, I'm teaching a class on X, right? How do I find this? This would be organized by class topics. I don't know in other disciplines, but in political science, right, there's standard chapters in the introductory textbook. There's the Constitution. You talk about the presidency. You talk about Congress. Each text may have a different approach to how you do that. But when you're talking about civil rights, right, any of these activities would be appropriate even if you're not using the OER text. And so we're hopeful that this sort of model will allow us to continue to use a free text, because if we don't update it, there's only so long that we can use a text from 2011, while at the same point in time keeping that current and relevant. So that's kind of all that I have. I've talked a lot. I wonder if you guys have any questions, suggestions, comments. You don't have to clap. That's good. Thank you. But does anybody have any questions or comments? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have this comment and question regarding stable information and fast-paced knowledge updating. I have this question because I'm in the bioengineering field. We had, for the past 20, 30 years, we have great advances in this field. And so I realized in my classes, for all the sub-disciplines in bioengineering, you have to be careful with the open source, open resources. If you read a publication from 10 years ago, the information from there may not be correct or accurate if you check the most updated information. So, I realize this, and I think it becomes critical to let students understand this. So I guess my question for you is, I want to hear your comments about, in political science, how do you deal with stable information and knowledge updating?
Certainly we have, the same sort of issues in political science, right? I mean, if you look at a text from 2011, it doesn't talk about the Affordable Care Act when it talks about healthcare policy. That's kind of a problem, right? That's a big deal. It doesn't talk about Citizens United, which completely upended our system of financing campaigns. And we've run into that issue, which is why we're trying to move to this distributed model. It allows us to sort of outsource that and to say, all right, let's find someone whose scholarly expertise is interest groups, right? And they're going to maintain the interest group chapter. And the idea is that once a year, or even on your own schedule, as you go in and you can update that. It's impossible to update an entire introductory text by yourself if you're not getting any money. If the publisher's paying you, you can do that, right? But a whole book by yourself is not possible. And that's why we're trying to look to, and I think other people are looking to this distributed model. It's great. There tends to be a lot of grant activity around developing these initial activities. But I think the next challenge that people are running into is, how do you keep that current? And that's why I put that quote up at the end, right? I know that that's not true for political science. I know it's not true now for bioengineering. And I'm pretty skeptical it's even true in math, right? Maybe for your most basic math course, but I think in every discipline faces the issue of how do you maintain these. And so that's also part of the problem of going out into all these other random repositories, right? At least if you also have a distributed model where people have ownership of it, there's some, right, sort of quality peer review sort of thing that I think helps with that. That's our theory, and that's what we're working on now. Whether that is feasible in the long run is the question, right? But I think it's the issue that everyone's running into with these sorts of things. It's work. It's a lot of work, right? I don't know. If anybody has other ideas about how to do it, how have you handled it? Do you just sort of have your students do it, or what do you do to make sure? Yeah.
I use a lot of information from recent publications, but from my own experience, you have to read a lot of things, and I'm not sure if I just throw this to students, they can handle it, because we only have like 3 hours a week for lecture time. So I mean, I'm still thinking, trying.
Right. I mean, the thing about OER resources is they're free for students, but they're not free for faculty. Right, that's a little bit of, I think, the difficulty that we're sort of struggling with. And you'll see, I know Matt had sent me, we got a grant from the College of Arts and Sciences Dean's Office, BCC, was it BCC or Bridgewater? I can't remember, you sent me.
BC.
Oh, it was BC, Boston College. I know Amherst is doing, so there's this idea of making grants available to help with that initial cost of building it, but then there's that question of sustaining it, right? And it'll be an interesting question to see in 2 years if Tracy calls me and says, oh, are you still using that OER textbook? Whether I say yes or no. You know, I was just visited 20 minutes before I came here, right? The publishers are responding to this. They freak out. They're like deer in the headlights when they come to your office and you say, oh, I'm using an OER text. They go, right? Well, we have a really low cost, right? It was Pearson Reps. They have a very low cost in their book, low cost. Interactive, online, all of these things that, right, I have as links outside of the text are integrated right into the main text, right? Quizzes as you go along, videos, links, right, all that, right? That becomes really attractive, right, when it's to have someone else do all that work that you're talking about. So it's a challenge. That's all I can say about it. I don't know, maybe.
It's probably just low cost for the initial, like anything, you know, and then a year or two from now, cost goes way down.
We'll see, although I think the publishers are increasingly finding competition from OER. And like I said, if you say those words, OER text, in there in your office, they their eyes bug out a little bit. They get really nervous about this, and I think they are. And so even if this does, it's producing pressures on textbook companies to reduce costs, which that's a good thing, right? I mean, that's ultimately a good thing because textbook costs are a big problem for our students. So other questions? Comments? Go ahead.
We'll say comment. The textbook in my class was a new edition this year, $130 per book. I would say a third of the class has not bought the book, which really impacts the delivery of, you know, what I can get across in a given class period and their homework and all of the above. But I really think about this because I really feel like textbooks are an old model, and that's not how students learn anymore. So to kind of hang on to, you know, these hardcover big books at expensive costs is, I don't know, it doesn't seem like it's keeping up with, it's not evolving quickly enough. So
Yeah.
this seems to me a little more like what you're talking about, and everything you built into my courses seems a little more like, I don't know, a little more fragmented, more multidimensional. How they're really finding information when they're not in a classroom for everything else.
It's hard though, right? Because I've been in the same school, they don't have the text, right? And you're trying to do, but then it's really a lot of work. We haven't completely exploded the textbook, but if you do and you're just doing, you know, thinking about online learning, like I have colleagues who've recorded their lectures and they built all this stuff, but then you've got to go back because things change. And you've recorded this lecture and you gave it 10 minutes, and now you've got to do that. Whereas when you're updating your lecture notes, right, that's different, or I feel like because you can do that very easily, whereas I'm not a video editor, right? So it's hard for me if I'm recording lectures to do that. And so I would love to get to a place where you don't have a text, and you know, our ideal when we started this would there be some text, right? This whole thing would be a page that was interspersed with text and links and videos, and that was a lot of work. So we didn't quite get there. We got the text and some links after it. I would love to get to where you talk about, because I think you're right, but I just don't know that I have the bandwidth to do that, and that's the hard thing, right? And again, why we're sort of thinking about trying to explore. I can maybe do that for one chapter, right? So if we can all, there's a lot of people, every high institution of higher education almost offers an introduction to American politics class, right? So there's got to be some way to share that work. And I think it's worth exploring across institutions. And one of the things we're also thinking about too is this is a way to, I think, engage our community college colleagues. For us, Intro to American Government is taught all the time in community colleges. For our community college colleagues, right, staying engaged with your discipline is different than it is for people who are research institutions. And so that might be a good method. Now, it's hard to make those connections, but we're sort of looking for that and exploring that. So I don't know. It's a challenge. It really is. I think you're right, though. Heidi, were you going to say something?
Oh, no.
All right. You know, this is the real. I mean, I think we've all probably agreed that it's great for students to be doing things differently and to reduce the cost. But how do we do it in a way that doesn't also break our backs in the process? I don't know. Go ahead.
Actually, like one example is business stat class that I teach. Not much changes in statistics compared to politics. Obviously, everything changes every year.
Right.
But still, new edition will cost like $130, $140, which is very expensive. And edition which is like maybe instead of 14th, if it is 12th edition, it may cost only maybe $40.
But the bookstore won't stock it, right? Because there's buyback issues. That's what drove me crazy, right?
But as an instructor, we can always tell students that you can buy it from Amazon, as long as like the instructor doesn't say that you have to do problems 1 to 10 from edition 14, chapter 3. So unless that specification is not there, it becomes very cheap for.
Yeah, one of the problems we ran into with that, though, was that, you know, we're the same way with political science. There needs to be some updating, but our textbook cycle got to be a year. And I'm like, this is what got me this. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I don't need my students to buy a new edition of the text every year. But part of the problem is that students rely on their financial aid checks to purchase their textbooks. And you cannot use your financial aid textbook at Amazon. You have to use it, I believe, through the bookstore. And when the bookstore says, we're not going to stock edition 5 because we can't take it back, or there's things about returning it to the publisher, now you have the problem with a third of the students haven't bought the text, a third of them have bought the 5th edition, and a third of them have bought the 10th edition, and nobody's on the same page. And so we got really sort of frustrated by that not only were students not buying the textbook, but we couldn't say to them, you don't have to buy the 2015, let's all buy the 2013. That didn't work for us either. So that's a real challenge too, that because there's these new versions coming out all the time, it makes it difficult to assign an old version of the text. Maybe the publishers, in addition to doing low cost, will not update as frequently. I doubt that'll happen, but that's hard, right? It's hard if you know, for students who have their financial aid. What do you do? Go ahead.
I'm wondering if you found anything in your research about kind of a bias in this, like say at Harvard, for example, if not every student can afford to buy the text, of course the institution's going to see to it that students can afford to buy the textbook. So I wonder if there's like some institution, if institution matters as a variable, like can you say, some places are relying completely on hard.
I haven't seen anything on that, although I will say that a lot of the movement to develop these sorts of things has come out of community colleges.
Yeah, because
I think it's the state of Washington had the whole state system of community colleges developed textbooks, OER textbooks for all of their introductory classes for use at the community college. It was this huge state, am I making this up? Am I right? It was like a huge state-sponsored project to do this, but they did it. I don't know if they've maintained them. I don't know where that's gone.
California has an affordable learning solutions for the entire state of California.
Right. But there's been, from what I've seen, right, this is true as a political scientist, right? Politicians are all on the bandwagon about giving money to start new programs, but the money to maintain it isn't necessarily there, and that creates a difficulty. So I haven't seen any research about institution type, but I do know that a lot of the work that I've seen has come out of community colleges and state systems as opposed to, although the one you saw was, you said, at BC, so maybe private institutions are becoming aware of this.
Because money is the main thing. If we're talking about students who are in need, if that's the main variable,
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, and one of the difficulties that we run into too is, right, we create these great My Courses sites, right, with all these interactive things, and So for instance, we might say when we're talking about policy, why don't you go in and do the budget simulator? How are you going to get rid of the national debt, right? Well, not everyone has a device, right? Or at that moment, their device, the wireless isn't working, right? And so that creates, we've all dealt with that, right? Those sort of logistical challenges, alongside that, right? That if they're not integrated, if you want to use them in class, not everyone can do them in class at that point in time. Hopefully someday we'll have a required device policy at some point, but I know we're not quite there yet on campus. So I'm looking at Tracy because I know she was on that. You were on that committee, you did a survey about that, right? A while back? Many years.
It wasn't really regards to devices. I'm just trying to get an idea.
Right. I would love to have some sort of, because if you require it, they can use their student loans or financial aid for that, but you can't now, and so not everyone has one. We use
CBPA has implemented it.
Oh, that's good. We use with this. We've been using Top Hat as opposed to clickers as for attendance and some interactive sort of stuff. Because they can use their devices. That's created some logistical challenges. We're not sure where to stay with that. I think there's another new one out of Harvard. I can't remember that Erica Zer is doing. I don't remember the name of that, you guys. She's got a new company that's a alternate to Top Hat, so we're exploring that. And hopefully out of the clickers. Are we still using the same clickers?
Currently, yes.
That hopefully, I mean, those have some really cool, some of the new ones have really cool features where you can do heat maps and map stuff and things like that. So that can make it more interactive and fun. Other questions? Comments?
Shannon, do you know anybody else in any other discipline doing kind of the modular approach that you're
So
talking about?
we originally got the idea from that big conference that the ID team put on.
No, it wasn't us.
Well, you guys were all there.
It was through the Zuckerberg.
The Zuckerberg, right, that Jen Riley organized, and Cable Green spoke there, and so we started thinking about this. We reached out to him as we started getting into this, and he connected us with someone at Creative Commons who talked about there are a few other people who are sort of moving towards this distributed model. I think it's sort of a new emerging way to deal with this. Part of our challenge is too, like we're thinking about where do we host this, what do we do, and some of my colleagues are like, oh, well, we'll just ask the American Political Science Association. I said, there's no way they're going to host this, right? Because where do our disciplinary organizations get their money from? Who publishes in their journals? Who pays to exhibit at their conferences? The publishers. So there's no way that they're going to host a free alternative textbook site. And so how do you organize this in the face of not active resistance, but maybe passive-aggressive resistance from, your disciplinary organizations, whose financial livelihood really depends on revenue from the publishers? That's a challenge as well. So we're trying to work those things out, but I think maybe there are some places, I got the email, I haven't really parsed through it yet about what's going on and where we might host it. I think there are some sites that are starting to emerge to do that. But that is a challenge as well, right? How do you reach out and find people that want to do this when you can't use, it's got to be word of mouth, right?
Where do you host? I guess you're talking about the amount of time, and of course that's a huge barrier, right? I mean, for you and Doug to be able to update it. Excuse me. It also seems like maybe your incentives at your individual institutions, like the tenure process, how does this get weighed? I'm sure it changes university to university, right? But
that was part of the question we posted too to Cable and to some of the other people at Creative Commons. And again, thinking about impact, right? I mean, I think there are ways that you can make the case about impact. Whether your institution values that is another question. Part of the challenge too that we want to do is we think the way to increase that impact for us personally is to have the UMD logo on it, right, and have it really sort of identified with the institution. Because if you can say, look, UMD is known for having these resources and building that, and 500 people are using this textbook that has, right, that's a way to make that case. We're running into some technical challenges with that, right? How do you create a wiki that's sort of UMD branded, but that people external to the institution can edit, right? And then if you're doing that, it's got our brand on it, and external people can edit it. You've got to have someone, right, moderate, right, those edits and comments, because what if someone puts something offensive up there? Now you've got negative impact. So these are all, I think, real logistical challenges that need to be worked out. Whether we work them out is the big unforeseen question, but we're working on it. And again, what we've done is we've sort of leveraged this, doing assessment into presentations at conferences. We have a scholarly journal, I think most disciplines do, about teaching in your discipline. The goal is to publish something about that there. So it's working for our teaching, but we're trying to get some scholarly publications out of it as well as pushing it out to the broader community to show impact that way. So we're thinking about that. Whether it's valued is another question, maybe beyond my pay grade.
Are there other interested faculty in your department who want to jump on with you?
So we have 3 faculty who, generally speaking, teach this course regularly. 2 of us are doing, 1 isn't. That's allowed us, it's an opportunity for us to compare course sections as controls, right? What do students think about and use of text? We have some of that data from the first semester. Unfortunately, our colleague forgot to put student IDs on that, so we wanted to match with sort of demographic characteristics to look at some controls. So we can do overall class comparisons. We can't control for individual sort of students to see if because also there can be sort of, wealth and racial and ethnic gaps in these sorts of measures about whether students can afford the textbook that we would like to look at. If there's a particular impact in different types of students, we can't, unfortunately, really do that. But we're working on that. But that's also a challenge, right, if you're at a smaller institution where you're the only, there's an introductory course where maybe there's several faculty who are doing it, but what if you're teaching an upper level course, right, and you're the only person in your department that does that? Then it becomes more difficult to sort of do a project like this. The only way I think we were able to make this work is because we shared the work. I took half of the chapters, Doug took half of the chapters. We built the course sites sort of independently, we split that work. I don't think I could have done it if it was just me.
And you're not getting more grant money, right? It's like the money is like...
Correct, right? And so we have to think about ways to sort of maintain this, right? Our idea had been, right, that we would use our work study students to help us do this, but of course there's been a change in work study policy on campus. So now I'm only allowed to hire 1 work study student, and that work study student has to work on my research, going back to incentives. So that makes it a challenge for us now, right? I'm not sure what we're going to do on that. Where hopefully when we distribute things out, we'll be able to maintain that. But for us, it creates a challenge. I don't think I'm going to get 2 work study students. Dean's office won't let me, right? Because we have to pay for that now. And we don't have a graduate program with graduate assistants or teaching assistants. We do have teaching assistants for the large sections, but they're doing a lot of other stuff too for the little itty bitty amount that we pay them for this semester. So it's a challenge. Other questions? Thanks for coming.